Hello, 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 and welcome to Darren's Daily Digest with me, Darren Grimes. Please do consider subscribing to Recent UK on YouTube if you haven't done so already. So in today's digest, I'm going to be speaking about Ben Fogle's call for us all to embrace St George's Day, German firms flocking to Brexit Britain in a boost for our PLC and GDP, the patriotic alliance between Nigel Farage and Laurence Fox, and finally, the threat to our standard of living and the least well off in society by another political alliance, the one between Boris Johnson and Joe Biden on all things green. Let's start the show. So first up, we've got St George. Now, English broadcaster and adventurer Ben Fogle has called on the nation to no longer feel ashamed of marking St George's Day. Instead, he wants us to celebrate it and have it be a celebration of England instead of a sort of snub to others within the Union. That's what the fear is amongst some English people. But Scotland has St Andrew's Day, Wales has St David's Day, Ireland, of course, had St Patrick's Day. And we don't celebrate Englishness. We're too scared to celebrate Englishness because we fear it has negative connotations or something like that. Actually, I think there's nothing wrong with being English. I'm quite proud to be English. I fundamentally believe in the union of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, but I'm still English. I was still born in the northeast of England. I'm still very, very proud to be English. I'm still very, very proud of what England has done throughout history. I'm so very, very proud that I come from a place as beautiful as this with green rolling hills that we should protect and nourish and be proud to be from. So I say tomorrow, let's all fly our damn flags, and not be ashamed of them. Why should Scotland get to be the only country that celebrates its own nation's pride? Why should Wales be the only nation that celebrates its own nation's pride? I mean, for goodness sake, you even have Cornish movements these days, and York flying their flag proudly. Why shouldn't we fly the flag of St George tomorrow and celebrate what it means to be English? And instead of, I think, running away from it with almost cringing levels of embarrassment, let's start being proud of our national character. Now, next up, we've got to go to Germany. German firms are more confident about doing business in Britain. The Telegraph are reporting that the German Director General of the German-British Chamber of Industry and Commerce has said that many firms previously planning to relocate staff and abandon the UK, and actually, in doing so, I think galvanise the Project Fear narrative that we heard in 2016, but subsequently ever since 2016 really. We've been told that businesses will just flood out of the UK. They'll be scrambling for the lifeboats to get out of Blighty. But this guy, director of their Chamber of Commerce, has actually said that there's renewed interest in the UK market, and also in terms of investment in the UK market, because he says it's an important market. So the companies and businesses that we were told would flee have decided against it when it actually came down to it. And there hasn't, as you well know, been a significant number of bankers leaving for Paris or Frankfurt. There hasn't been mass panic and shortages of medicines or food, as we were warned. I think it's time to leave Project Fear well behind her and look forward to Project Cheer. The nation is united behind Brexit, given the EU's abysmal handling of the vaccine rollout and its treatment of our nation ever since. I think we should be united in our optimism for this great country and what we can actually achieve in the world. Now we've got our democratic freedoms and liberties actually restored. So, smile, folks. Now, next up, Brexit hero Nigel Farage. So, Nigel Farage and Richard Tice and the rest of the Reform Party, formerly known as the Brexit Party, which of course won those European elections, our final lot in 2019, they've thrown their support behind the actor and free speech legend Laurence Fox, who's standing to become the next Mayor of London against Sadiq Khan. So they're united in their belief that the divisive and ineffective Sadiq Khan has been absolutely terrible for London. They've hailed it as a patriotic alliance to unlock London and get rid of Khan's penchant for green policies that'll hurt many of the poorest Londoners, and of course for his fondness for the lockdown strategy. I've not met someone who's asked for it harder and faster more times than Sadiq Khan has. But Nigel Farage said it feels highly appropriate that on the eve of St George's Day, a new patriotic alliance between Reform UK and the Reclaim Party is being announced. And he goes on to say, with the big Brexit battle now being over what kind of country people want to live in, a free nation or a semi-authoritarian regime, this debate needs to happen very quickly, and I wish Laurence Fox and Richard Tice all the very best. So in return, Laurence Fox and Reclaim will be endorsing Reform's candidates for the London Assembly. And this is what I think a uniting of the pro-common sense politics that we need to see, and long may it continue. I think in an age of absolute uncertainty and insanity, we've never needed it more than we do now. Next up, Nicola Sturgeon, I nearly said there. Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond. Nigel Sturgeon, that's a thought that I really didn't want to enter my mind. Oh dear, Nicky Sturgeon. It looks like Alex Salmond's drama and her own failings in managing Scotland during the pandemic have come back to haunt you. The people of Scotland would vote against separatism in a second Scottish independence ballot, according to 2 new polls. That'll weaken, I think, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon's demands for a referendum rerun after losing 2014's so-called once-in-a-lifetime vote. A very odd definition of once in a lifetime in Scotland. Polls by both Comres and YouGov have found that the support for the SNP's raison d'etre, its reason for existing, the dissolution of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, would be rejected by a margin of close to 10 points, the 10 points secured by the Unionists in 2014, on everything from Brexit to the vaccines to being united in our grief for our monarch, Her Majesty the Queen. I think there's been a sense of unity in this country over recent times, and long may it continue. I think that's what's to blame for a look at what the SNP are offering. In an almost one-party state, independence, so-called independence, when they're not using most of the powers they've got at the minute, or much of them anyway. So I think a lot of people in Scotland have just looked at this and thought, well, thanks, but no thanks. Now, finally, folks, I want to wish us all a very happy Earth Day. But also, friends, to ask you to just take a moment, take a deep breath in on this Earth Day, and out. And just remember the Earth and the civilization, which both perished on this day in 1970 and 1980, which is the prediction that was made on the Earth Day, the very first Earth Day of 1970. We didn't survive, and it's a very sad day. Now, there's no doubt I'll be called all sorts of things for this video. A climate denier, a right-wing shill for big oil. I could go on and on. I consider myself to be a conservationist, someone that believes in protecting the environment. I cringe at those who leave the tap running as I brush my teeth. I seek solace in the rolling greenery of our country. I'd like our air to be cleaner, and I'd, of course, like to, as a conservative, I'd like to see our earthly inheritance protected for future generations. But I believe we're making a really quite profound mistake as a nation in the name of tackling climate change. So this morning, Extinction Rebellion, a well-heeled bunch of them, a bunch of the middle-aged middle classes, made their midlife crises public as they were carted off in police vehicles for smashing windows at HSBC's office in London. And what is it that they're even campaigning for now? What justifies this criminal damage? I hope each and every one of them are charged and fined. They can take the financial hit, you see. Unlike the poorest in Britain, who under the policies that this extreme group champions, which they've won, by the way, those policies are mainstream now. The United Kingdom is fully signed up to becoming carbon neutral, so much so that it's willing to place an asphyxiating target of net zero by 2050, like a straitjacket or a noose around the British economy. That'll see the price of food in our supermarkets rise, the cost of heating our homes increase. It will prohibit cheap flights and mean that driving your car is a luxury that the least well-off simply cannot afford. But that's perhaps not the maddest green-eyed policy. Maybe Extinction Rebellion are the ones on the sane side of things. Because today, Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng said we need to change our lifestyles to tackle climate change. He referred to the rising number of people giving up meat and dairy, helping to drive the progress towards the UK's target of slashing emissions by 78%. So they're already suggesting that we ought to preclude meat from our diets. If Kwasi Kwarteng wants us to survive on a diet of Greg's vegan sausage rolls, that's his business, but I'd kindly suggest that he leaves me out of it, thank you very much. And what does Kwasi think the message is to our rural farming communities? What does this say to them, who have got a really quite uncertain future at the moment? What does it say to them in this post-Brexit moment? That this government won't support them? That this government will instead pander to Greta Thunberg and Extinction Rebellion? I think that this is all becoming a little bit too cartoon, if you ask me. And this is at a time when I think there's much to be celebrated here on planet Earth. Weather-related disasters have dropped massively, radically, over the last century by about 80 times when compared to a century ago. Our capacity to innovate as human beings has meant that despite a boom in the world's population, there's also been a boom in production of food and in fighting disease and coming up with ingenious life-saving and life-changing technologies. And when these things are considered, and when each and every apocalyptic prediction made long before I was born, I was just a star in the sky. And many people on the left wish I'd stayed that way. But long before I was born, they've not amounted to nothing. These predictions of doom and gloom have amounted to nothing. The world hasn't burst into a ball of flames. We haven't immersed ourselves in a pool of water, which, by the way, is the sort of apocalyptic nightmare that haunts our nation's children thanks to the teaching of this stuff to our kids and the Greta Thunberg effect. I really do think, sadly, it's not limited to Greta and her acolytes. His Royal Highness the Duke of Cambridge even got in on the act, Prince William. He's issued a call on the nation to use the same dedication in tackling COVID to fight climate change. And I've got to ask to His Royal Highness, with the greatest amount of respect, I have a great amount of time for His Royal Highness Prince William. But given that billions of us have been squirreled away behind doors from this virus, given that that's what we're told it's going to take by groups like Extinction Rebellion to reduce our carbon emissions, they're talking about climate lockdowns now. This stuff is all contested politically and within the scientific community. So I really do think that it's worrying. I'm going to be honest with you, and I say this as a proud monarchist. It's worrying to see this from our future monarch. If our future monarchs, because we include of course Prince Charles in this, if future monarchs start to involve themselves in decisions that will have consequences for which I'm afraid we're simply not prepared yet, we cannot fully realise just how disproportionate the burden of net zero by 2050 is going to be. I think the future monarchs are at risk of becoming figureheads of policies that will continue to lead to real hardship for some of our country's least well-off communities, and that risks demystifying the magic of monarchy that sits well above the political fray. And again, I repeat, I say this as a monarchist, I think that's a really dangerous game to be playing, and that actually we need to get the monarch out of politics. I don't think they should be talking about these sorts of things and you know, running riot on talking about all of this stuff. And then, of course, Joe Biden and Boris Johnson have had a bit of a love-in today, where Boris promised to reduce emissions by 78% by 2035, as I said earlier, compared with 1990 levels, and Biden has announced similarly extreme targets of cutting US emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030. Neither of them, of course, are going to be in office when they're supposed to have realised these targets. It'll be left to you and I and our friends and cousins in America, people that are left to deal with the consequences of politicians just bandying about these targets. The Prime Minister has done all he can to show Biden just how green he is ahead of the COP26, a climate summit that's taking place in Glasgow later this year. And this all matters, folks, because of the dangerous trend that's been developed, in which moderate scepticism about all of this, I'd argue I've got moderate scepticism in it. Of course, I think it's important to protect the environment. But if you say, actually, I think an arbitrary target is actually really hampering the British economy and puts us at real risk of harming the very poorest very disproportionately. And this stuff being pushed by big business, by banking, by our politicians, you'll be dismissed as a denier. You'll be dismissed as being in denial. If you ask for the costings, for the consequences, and for the choices involved in sacrificing so much to the altar of greenery, what will the Prime Minister say to the lads and lasses at Nissan who might lose their jobs? Who will pay for insulating 30 million homes? Who's going to stump up for converting gas boilers to electric heating? Would you accept a £20,000 bill being plumped at your door? UK manufacturing at a time, by the way, when opposition politicians are calling on the taxpayer to step in and rescue UK-based Liberty Steel, well, I'm afraid it's just going to be more than steel that relocates to China. They'll be the ones that benefit when we've exported our jobs out of this country. They'll be the ones we order our wind farms from. Because guess what you need to build those things? You need steel and cement. And guess what? There's no means of decarbonising just yet. High-emitting industries like steel and cement. Ultimately, right, this boils down to this. China and Russia and economies like theirs will never be stupid enough to set a target without having the slightest idea of how they're going to pay for it. We haven't even begun to work out what the gargantuan task of the burden for businesses and consumers will be, thanks to increased aviation, shipping and exporting of our emissions to developing nations around the globe. And of course, I repeat that again and again, of course we want to do more for the environment. The British people emphatically want to do more for the environment. But I'm afraid that those of us who are sceptical about what we're doing here aren't the ones denying anything. It's those burying their heads in the sand and dismissing concerns on the cost and the consequences of these targets. I think, at the end of the day, Brexit made Boris Johnson. Gave Boris Johnson that massive majority in seats up here in County Durham. But I really do fear that these attempts to appease Biden and other Green fanatics could be the undoing of the man and that legacy that he's started to build already. This stuff, come on, get real about the cost, the costings and the consequences. The 3 C's. Start thinking about this stuff in the context of the 2 C's of climate change before it's too late and we do irreparable harm to our nation and its people. Anyway, folks, that's my rant. I'm sorry for going on a bit, but I really do care about that particular topic anyway, so I'll leave you to it. But as I say, please do consider subscribing to Reasoned on YouTube if you haven't already. Please do support work because it helps us keep on keeping on. I'll post some clips from this onto our YouTube, so please do share them if you liked anything that you've heard tonight. Alright, thank you very much. I'll speak to you later. Cheers. Reasoned relies upon grassroots donations from people like yourself that want us to continue producing our high quality, free thinking content. So please do consider clicking the link and donating, no matter how big, no matter how small, because it really does ensure that we can keep on keeping on.